TFT's been out for almost a year and a half, but unfortunately, we've seen a lot of players come and go. The game's still pretty popular, but I can't help but feel that people are quitting and the community is getting smaller. While no game ever holds on to its hype from launch, the biggest critique of TFT that I have is its inability to keep up with its supportive player base. In this video, we'll go over reasons why TFT has been stagnating and hopefully figure out a way Riot could reverse this trend. I personally think there are two reasons why TFT is struggling. Number one, the developers are unable to effectively monetize the player base, which makes it difficult to invest back into the game for more core features and community growth. And number two, I think that the top personalities and influencers do not have an incentive to keep supporting the game, causing them and their fans to quit. Both of these lead to smaller player bases over time. Let's start with monetization. Without money, you can't have nice things. Tons of other games that have come out within the past year have received so much more support from its creators despite a much smaller fan base. Ironically, one big offense is Riot's other game, Legends of Runeterra. Much smaller fan base, but drastically more support. The game itself is aesthetically gorgeous. When I played Legends of Runeterra, I thought it was an amazing game, and I actually thought it was going to take off. Despite LOR not taking over as the top card game, it still has its own client, and Riot actually has staff dedicated to growing the shrinking community. Now let's look at TFT. How does Riot treat the game with a decent player base? Pretty much with nothing. I could talk about the esports aspect where TFT have rare tournaments with skimpy prize pools. For example, in the European TFT Championships, they were rewarded with little legend eggs, while Legends of Runeterra have a random Masters tournament with a 24k prize pool. Before anyone makes excuses, I'll cut the esports talk short because TFT doesn't have a spectator mode, and it is a new game genre, so it is probably more difficult to get the production aspects in place for TFT than other games, so I'll let the esports aspect slide. Instead, if we look at the Twitter for both TFT and LOR, we can see that there's actually a dedicated LOR Twitter manager who posts every day. Meanwhile, TFT's Twitter manager posts every few days, and it's often just lazy retweets of someone else's content. Now, we have to assume that a lot of this lack of support is due to not being monetized correctly, because if TFT was making a ton of money, there's no problem pouring more money into TFT to grow the player base and to make more money in the future as a company. But we've run into some problems with that. The developers keep claiming that TFT isn't dying. However, they've only released the player base data once, and that was towards the beginning of TFT where it was super popular, and pretty much every other data point that you could get your hands on, such as the web, social media, everything points to TFT declining in player base or interest. For example, search interest for TFT is low and declines every set, and I honestly feel like set 4 is the coolest set compared to sets 2 and 3, yet the player base is still shrinking. I actually wanted to try to take my website more seriously, and I spoke to a search engine optimization expert, or SEO expert, who told me that it wasn't even worth optimizing my website for SEO traffic because the search traffic is just too low. He said that getting any of the search engine traffic is just not even worth it in the short run or the long run. Another problem is that the developers insist that TFT is being monetized correctly. Whenever this is mentioned, they often just deflect on this and just say, oh, it is being monetized correctly. But let's start with what Riot could do if they did have more money and resources. First, spectator mode. We talked about this before. You can't have a competitive scene without spectator mode. We have no client for TFT. We're still sharing the League client. We even share the website and YouTube channel with League as well. They don't have their own dedicated TFT channel, whereas all of other Riot's games do. And the last major UI update that I could think of was actually done by an intern. I know that interns are very skilled and age doesn't mean anything in terms of programming ability, but it just goes to show how little attention's being sent to the game. I just can't help but feel that TFT is getting limited support from the overall Riot organization. And I think it's okay as a developer of TFT to say that there just isn't much support. But don't say that there is a ton of support when clearly the data, aka the results, do not back up that conclusion. And the TFT team, they always say that they make their decisions and judgments based on data. But again, we've had pretty much zero features added to TFT since launch pretty much. Another reason why I think the game isn't being monetized correctly is that the game is very cheap compared to other games. Let's compare to League, for example. Of course, in free-to-play games, you have a lot of people who don't spend any money at all. For example, I've never spent any money in TFT, and there are a bunch of other free-to-play games that I haven't spent any money at all. But for League, there are a couple levels of spending, and let's get into that. There's some people who just get one skin on their favorite champion, and that's it. There are people that get one skin for every champion they play, but they play a lot of champions. And then lastly, there are people who get multiple skins for all of their champions. I know some people in the last group, and they spend around like $2,000 to $3,000 throughout their lifetime of playing the game. And it's just kind of crazy that you could actually spend that much in a video game. But the other people, for example, the second tier where they have like one skin for a bunch of different champions they play, that was me. I spent around $200 in League of Legends. I played it for 10 years. But then you also have the people who just buy one skin and that's it. So that's around like $10 right there. There are varying levels, but I feel like these are the most common profiles of people spending money on League of Legends. Now let's look at TFT. You can have 3 different things in TFT: a little legend, an arena skin, and a boom. Booms are typically collected through the season passes, which are around $10, but you also get a bunch of other things such as upgrade shards, little legend eggs, and some maps. In terms of maps, you could go ahead and buy one for $10 as well, or get a bundle for like $20. However, there are a ton of free maps that you could use, so there's not really that much incentive to buy one of these maps unless you really like one of them. Lastly, and most importantly, we have the little legends, and you could get a bunch of little legends. They come out with new ones all the time, but these are also less than $10. But you only need to use one of these. You don't need to use multiple, whereas in League, there are multiple champions. So you probably want one skin for each different champion, and that just makes you spend a lot more money on the game. If you guys consistently use more than one little legend, let me know in the comments below, but primarily I just know people who use 1, maybe 2 different little legends apart from the free ones that they get. I almost forgot, if you want to upgrade your little legend, you need to spend 10 more bucks to get the 3-star upgrade, or you could get a big bundle if you want to upgrade multiple of them. There's really no catalyst that really pushes people to get multiple little legends, especially to high tiers. So all in all, you can spend pretty much like $50 on the game and have like a complete setup that you want. And if you want to go super extra and you go get like 5 different little legends and maps all upgraded, that'll cost you maybe like $200 or $250. This is pretty much nothing compared to the $2,000 to $3,000 that you can spend on League of Legends. And again, those are super extra, whereas in League, they come out with super cool skins, which I could kind of see how people can justify buying them, even though I personally wouldn't. So all of this criticism means nothing if I don't offer something that could possibly be better. And I think adding things like hats, shoes, maybe like a unique taunt that each little legend can do would probably be pretty interesting because it adds on to your favorite little legend that you already have. So it's something extra that you have to spend. Instead of spending $50, you spend like $10 on a taunt or a hat. It just pretty much grows from there. The next idea that I have is maybe have like a super rare little legend at the start of each set. And it's kind of like a first come, first serve for finding it. You have to open up a ton of eggs to try to get it. And since they are limited, people will have to buy eggs as early as possible in order to try to get that little legend that's super rare. And I think that'd be pretty cool. I can see how like a game company doing this would kind of be seen as money grubbing. But if you want to make more money, having limited time events or having limited stock of certain little legends is something that just has to be done. The next topic I'm going to go over is kind of controversial. And I actually think that the TFT team should spend less time on balance and more time to give TFT the new features it deserves. People are going to complain regardless of the patch. When one comp is dominant, people complain. When a few comps are dominant, people complain. And when everything is viable, people still complain. We are in a perpetual cycle of the developers trying to cater to the loudest voice, but regardless, there's going to be people who don't like certain patches no matter what you do. And I feel like it's the same volume of complaints no matter what the patch is, both from the general player base and from the pro players. And I've said this before, due to the shared champion pools, it resembles a lot of traditional market dynamics, which makes the game kind of balance itself. And with all these factors in mind, I think the developers should instead focus on improving the product by evolving beyond an MVP instead of just sliding numbers around. Next, let's look into the top personalities quitting, which is what I think is one of the factors that drives the most amount of players to a game and also drives the players out of the game. Whenever someone famous or someone popular says something negative about a game, all their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of fans are going to hear that, and they might adopt the same thinking that that person spits out. Now let's look at all the players in the past that were popular that do not play TFT anymore. So in terms of all the big names, I want to look at Disguised Toast, Scara, and Pult, and just other medium to large former card game pros. The one that comes to my mind the most is Disguised Toast. This guy has a ton of followers. He puts out YouTube videos. They all get 500,000 to 1 million views. But if we look on his profile here, his TFT videos have all declined after a certain point, and pretty much no one was really interested in that type of video anymore, and then he eventually moved on to other games. There are a lot of other former card game pros that tried TFT, and they all quit within the first set as well. Next up, we have Scara. Scara still plays TFT, but definitely not as much as he has before. And again, I'm not saying that people should play TFT. They should do whatever they want. I'm just saying that these players have really no reason to play TFT. But we can see his viewership declining as well for TFT videos, and people's viewership gets better when they do variety streams compared to playing TFT all day. And I know that some personalities focus on entertainment, but a lot of the competitive card game players that did try out TFT, they all left because of the lack of a competitive scene. The competitive scene in TFT is very cliquey, and it's almost non-existent as well because there just aren't many tournaments with reasonable prize pools. We could look at like tournament winnings. They have a bunch of these, and the most are just for fun events, which are just promotional events that they give money away to players that don't actually stick with the game. Now let's look at Polt. My biggest video ever was talking about him, so I feel like I should address this. He did move on to a new game, which is League of Legends, and he's actually going to be a coach for SKT, or T1 is what I think they're called now, and I feel like his treatment in the TFT scene was not that great. Again, as I mentioned before, it's very cliquey in TFT esports, and when he was high on the ladder, he was pretty much excluded from every top 10 player list, just like all the other new players, despite being in the top for months. I know that a lot of people think that getting rank 1's really big. It isn't, because a lot of players only keep it for like one patch, but he actually kept it for a bunch of patches in a row, and he was in the top 10 for like months and months, but he still didn't get quite the same respect as all the other top players. Second, he wasn't really given a chance to show if he could be one of the best players, because a lot of the tournaments he played in, there were only like 1 or 2 big tournaments, and he had like a random life event during one of the tournaments. I think he was moving or something, so I think he played on like a laptop on a bus or something like that. That's a rumor, at least. I don't actually know what happened, but you can't play to the best of your ability when you're in that situation, and because TFT has a lot of randomness in it, sample size is something that's very important, and just having a chance at 2 tournaments doesn't really speak to a player's ability. For example, K3 Soju, he's pretty much not done so well in every tournament he's played in until recently, and I think he's a very good player. If your sample size is very low because there are no TFT tournaments, you can't really judge a player after 2 or 3 tournaments. So for example, he's done well recently, and I feel that's well deserved because he's qualified for pretty much every tournament because he's a very good player. This is contrasting to the random GMs who do well in one tournament and are never seen again. A lot of people think like, oh wow, what a great tournament player, even though he's a random GM player who doesn't play the game at the same level as someone else. I feel like there's a big difference in that. And again, this is all due to sample size. And I feel like Polt wasn't given a good enough sample size because of the lack of tournaments in a game that's so dependent on it. But essentially, the lack of support for esports in TFT from Riot, from tournament organizers, is kind of a reason why a lot of these players quit. All the major esports organizations don't care about TFT. It is almost impossible as a good player who isn't popular to get signed with a team with the esports contract, because there's just no value that an organization gets from having a TFT pro on their team unless they're a big streamer. So if you are both good and a big streamer, that is the only way you'll get picked up by a team. For example, we can look at a European player, Salvi. He has been rank 1 every single set, or rank 2, and it took him like half a year at least to find a team. And there have been very few other major teams that have picked up players in TFT for esports. Which brings me to my next topic. None of the non-big names in TFT get any support from Riot. For example, K3 Soju, who's the biggest TFT streamer right now, he averages 8,000 views, didn't get invited to a single set showcase yet. And that's because he wasn't big in a different game before. They only invite people who are big from other games. And I know that these set showcases are to bring in new players, but you should still support your biggest fans and the people who have the most invested in your game by at least inviting them and taking up one slot. Because if you don't treat the personalities who are invested in your game well, eventually they'll leave too. And if K3 Soju is not getting invited to set showcases, imagine how difficult it is for all the middle of the road content creators who also get zero support. So in the end, Riot doesn't get big names to stick with the game and give almost nothing back to the ones that do stick with the game. We merely scratch the surface on what's causing people to leave and what can be done to combat it. I think Riot should take a risk with TFT to try to regain some ground instead of just dying a slow, painful death. With games like League and COD, a lot of consumers think that games last forever, but in reality, they don't, and almost every other game on Earth dies after a few years. League is just an outlier. It's not too late to stop TFT from dying like the other 50 card games made in recent years, and there's still time to turn TFT into something special instead. I know that this type of content is slightly different than what I normally do. If you guys are new to the channel, I do bring out a lot of guides, tier lists every Friday, and general tips for TFT, so if you are interested in that, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. If you guys enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, as that helps me a ton. The more people that view this, maybe the more that Riot will care about their game and maybe try to put a little more resources back into it. But apart from that, I will see you guys tomorrow on Friday for the meta snapshot, so keep a lookout for that. I'll see you guys next time.